This week on The Sidetrack, we'll be joined by writer-director Matt Spicer as we take a trip back to 1981 to revisit what's now considered a classic, but then was considered a box office disappointment. None other than the John Travolta, Nancy Allen starring Blowout. That's this week on The Sidetrack. Hi, it's Paul Davidson, your obsessive-compulsive film fanatic / host of The Sidetrack. If this is the first episode you are listening to or that you've downloaded, welcome. We will be bringing you episodes across what we're calling our quote-unquote, that's air quotes, Season 1 of the show. And this, aside from this one, you may have missed or may have listened to the premiere episode, which is available on iTunes and Spotify, and included yours truly speaking to the glory that was and still is 3 O'Clock High from 1987. Ironically, since that released, I've had multiple folks reach out to me to tell me that they themselves auditioned for the title role in the movie, which just goes to show you that any actor who nails any role, it can be any one of us. That's all I'm saying. It could have been you. You could have been that close, but then Casey snagged the role. Well, it's good that you're here because this week kicks off the first season of The Sidetrack. And that means on a weekly basis, every Thursday, we'll be bringing you a new feature-length audio commentary by filmmakers, directors, actors, thespians, screenwriters, craft service managers. We do not discriminate in the filmic space, just so you know. As always, these podcast endeavors, do require word of mouth, well wishes, social media retweets, and forwards. So if you dig the show, if you dig what we're doing, let people know. Let that circle of friends sitting at home wondering what movie they're going to watch tonight know about this, The Sidetrack. Now this week, I'm excited to bring on Matt Spicer, who we'll speak to in just a moment. It is a bittersweet, as Mr. Spicer and myself do have some history, because while I was running The Orchard, we released the Max Winkler-directed film Flower, starring Zoe Deutsch, which happened to be, ironically, co-written by both Max Winkler and Matt Spicer. But there's lots more to talk about. Matt has got quite the history, and so we're going to sit down with him, hear about his inspirations, hear a little bit about his history, and why Blowout. So here we go with Matt Spicer. So I'm here with Mr. Matthew Spicer. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for taking the time out of, sitting in your house for the last 6 months?
Yeah, pretty much. I've just been writing, and my fiance and I are fixing up our house. So I created a screening room in our guest house in an office that is where I watched the movie last night. It was great.
That's awesome. Well, so for people who don't know you by name, and of course, some people, to your social media accounts, don't confuse Matt Spicer with Sean Spicer, who I think is kind of left our purview these days. There's much more disturbing things happening than Sean Spicer.
I know. I was getting tired of answering that question.
Yes, so we won't talk about that. But listen, if I go through all the things that you've done and you've directed and written, which I will, but the question that I wanted to ask you first is, when you find yourself at a film festival, I'm not going to say on the street with just a random public, because it's not like you're an actor where you're on screen and people recognize you, but in those festivals, at those award events, you're promoting a movie. What's the film that people come up to you the most and say, "Oh my gosh, Matt, I saw X and I absolutely love this film"? What is that for you?
I would say probably Ingrid, but also there's a movie I produced called Flower, which you may know, that actually also gets a lot of love, particularly on social media. I get a lot of people reaching out to me saying how much they love that movie.
Would you say, in hindsight, looking back now, that putting box office aside, that Flower probably is the more successful of the two?
I don't know. I didn't see the final box office numbers,
That's
so
right.
I don't know. I'm just kidding.
I mentioned at the start of the podcast, I think that when I was at the Orchard, we released that movie, which is I have questions about as well. Well, but let's talk about Ingrid Goes West. So my experience with Ingrid Goes West, because of course that's what people are here for, right? I'm only kidding. Is that when I saw that movie at Sundance, we were there looking to buy films. I flipped over the movie from the buyer's perspective at Sundance, like someone like myself. There's one experience. There's the experience of, what's funny is like you've spent that whole history of Ingrid just wanting to make a great movie, get it into Sundance, and find the right home for it. And by the time you get to Sundance, you've already done all of that work. For somebody like me, I show up at Sundance, I see the movie, I'm like, I must have this movie, and then it's about pitching Aubrey in the room to try to get you to convince you that we're the right people to release your movie, which didn't end up being the case, which is all good. But I wanted to know, from your perspective, when you're at Sundance and you're going through that whole experience, what's the most surprising thing for you? What was something you didn't expect? Oh shit, I didn't expect this is how it was going to play out, or this is how this would go, of that Sundance experience for people who haven't been a part of something like that.
I mean, so much of it was one of the most intense weeks of my life. So it was like every second it felt like, you sort of it took me some time, I think, even after, to kind of process what happened, because it all happened so quickly that it's hard to kind of keep up mentally. And that's, I think, what everyone kind of warned me about that, but to go through it is another thing. I was also as soon as we touched down in Utah, I realized I was getting horribly sick. And so I had a full fever the entire time that I was at the premiere, at the after party, during the whole sales process. I was fully sick, but I think I was just on so much cold medicine and adrenaline that I just was just powering through it. So it was the whole thing was kind of I had a major come down after that first weekend. I was just kind of what happened? Because it felt I mean, I was happy, obviously, at the response and what had happened, but it was just it is kind of you're on a roller coaster and then you kind of get off. And it sounds cliche to say that because that's what everybody says, but it's the closest thing that you can relate it to, because it's just really intense, really short. And then you're just kind of holy shit.
And do you,
what just happened?
At the time it's happening, you have the folks that are the sales agents who are representing the movie. Do you feel without calling out names or any particular companies, whatever it may be, are they pushing you towards some kind of release, or clearly the agents want, they're better off the bigger the number is. So sometimes, contrary to what people believe, sometimes a filmmaker will take less because they don't want to be on a streaming platform, like what happened with the oh my gosh, I'm spacing The Farewell. That's an example of that director wanted to go with A24 despite the fact that Netflix was offering us so much more money. For you, when you're sitting in the room listening to people pitch you on why they want to release your film, are there things that are more important to you that may not be as important to you and Aubrey, but may not be as important to the financiers or the agents who are trying to get the highest amount?
It was funny because that whole process was really intense, and it was we seriously considered every person that was interested in the film, seriously interested in the film. We had a really intense debate, and I think I had what I would call a Jerry Maguire moment where I sort of blacked out and just gave some kind of monologue about why I thought it was important that this movie come out in theaters. And because Netflix had made an offer, and obviously it wasn't anything against Netflix, and I think in hindsight, I'm really glad that it came out in theaters, because who knows, after this pandemic, what the theatrical world is going to look like for indie films. But, I just was that was something that was really important to me. And I know it was important to Aubrey too. And to the credit of, CAA, who sold the film, and the financiers and producers, they ultimately were like, that was something that they realized was potentially important for them too. So that was like that, but that was the big thing, I think. And then, Switch, it was, we're talking about, Neon and Orchard. And that was really, it was just like it was a whole, honestly, like a long, intense discussion, but it's also crazy because people there's a gun to your head, you're like, you have to make a decision in this certain amount of time. And the whole thing is you're like, I really just hope that I make the right decision. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's like, you don't really know. And I remember, I asked a lot, I remember asking a lot of questions. Did you feel like, because I had talked to a lot of filmmakers before. I talked to Charlie McDowell and Antonio Campos before I went about that process, because they had both sold films there, and it was just like, what do you do? Like, and they both said the same thing, which is just like, you just ask a lot of questions and you just hope in the end that you made the right decision. It's really like, no one can predict the future and who knows what's going to happen. So it really is crazy. But I just remember, as soon as I knew that there was somebody that was going to buy the movie, I was so relieved, because I was like, we would be so lucky to end up with any of these places, to have the movie even come out. So it was sort of like, we win no matter what for me personally. And I think the financiers were like, okay, like, how do we make our money back?
I know. And the crazy thing is, when you look at,
so I respect that.
When you look at Sundance, the amount of movies that even get, look, there's thousands of movies that apply, 150 maybe that make it in, and then how many end up with a distribution deal. It's not as significant. Just getting into Sundance doesn't necessarily guarantee you that. So it is always nice when you've got a significant offer or something close to making back your money.
And Donald Trump had just gotten inaugurated, so it was just like the Women's March was that year, and it was a crazy blizzard, and they had shut down. We didn't even get to do the pancake breakfast with Robert Redford, so it was already kind of like a really weird year, and so I was just like, who knows what's going to happen? Like it was really scary. Like, we just didn't know. We knew The Big Sick was going to premiere, and we knew that was going to be a big movie, so we were just like, we hope that people discover us, and have the appetite.
Well, and one other question on that, I just watched it recently, and I'm so impressed with the casting on that movie. Down to O'Shea. I'm always spacing, by the way, on the actor who plays the brother of Billy
Magnuson.
Yeah, what's his name?
Billy Magnuson.
He's amazing. That dude.
He's great. He's becoming like, he's in the new Bond movie that hasn't come out yet.
Oh, wow.
That's supposed to come out. His career he was in Aladdin. So he's like, people are discovering him. But yeah, I think he's really, really like dynamic, fantastic actor.
What was the progression of the process briefly? Like, did you write the script? Were you like, when did Aubrey come on board? How quickly did it move once Aubrey jumped on board that film?
That was, I think, the key moment. It was really the two key pieces of cast were Aubrey, and then once Lizzie agreed to do it. I don't know why I call her.
You're allowed to call her Lizzie.
Lizzie agreed to do it. She was like, that was it felt like we had, a go movie.
Yeah.
But it took us about, I would say, 5 or 6 months to write the script, and then Aubrey read it. It got to Aubrey very quickly, and then she and I met, and within a couple meetings, she had signed on to do it, and then it was like 6 months later we were shooting the film. It was a really quick. I've had a lot of I've written a lot of movies over the last however many. I'm like, honestly, don't even want to count. 13 years of working in Hollywood, right. And this, just the process. I know how long it can take. Flower took 4 or 5 years to get made from when we finished that script. It takes a long time sometimes.
Well, so speaking of Flower, which again we've mentioned that eventually, while I was at the Orchard, we released that film. That's a Blacklist script that Alex, it's Macaulay, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who wrote. How does a Blacklist script like that land in the laps of you and Max Winkler, and what does that look like?
I discovered the script because my fiance read it, and she at the time my girlfriend, and she said, I really like the script. I think you should read it. And so she sent it to me, and I loved it. and Max and I were going to see Inside Llewyn Davis, and so we went to like an award screening of that movie, and we were having dinner afterwards, and he was like, "Have you read anything good?" And I said, "Yeah, I read the script Flower. I really loved it." And he said, "That's so crazy. I just met with the guys at like Brandon at I'm blanking on Rough
Diablo
House, and they sort of mentioned that script to me, and I was like, you should read it. It's really, really great. I don't know if he had already read it at that point, but then he was sort of like, yeah, let's do it. So we talked to them, and we did a couple passes on it. And I think it was like, it almost came together at one point with, I'm blanking on her name, and she was in that movie Booksmart, opposite Beanie Feldstein.
Caitlin Dever.
Caitlin Dever, yeah. Caitlin Dever. At one point we were talking to her, and it was just this whole, like, it sort of came together and fell apart a few times. And then when Zoe came on, that's when it clicked.
Man, I'm surprised that, I mean, look, I don't want to make her feel like I'm saying she's not ultra successful, but I feel like she should be 10 times even more successful than she is now, because everything that she seems to do, the energy and the quality of the performance, I'm just always blown away by her, and especially in that movie. I mean, I saw that. I remember watching that movie. I wasn't at Tribeca. I was at home in LA, and they sent me a link to it, and I literally watched it. You know, I'm sure nobody appreciates it. I watched it on, my laptop with earphones, and within 5 minutes I was in. And look, I mean, the writing was amazing. Her ability to take those words that you guys wrote and flesh out this 3-dimensional, character. I mean, just amazing to me.
She's great. Yeah, she's fantastic. And like, I remember, I didn't know who she was, honestly, until she, because I'm not like cool, and I don't know if she, she's very up and coming. And so that, CAA was like, you should see this girl. She really wants to do this movie. And I was like, I don't know. Okay. I don't know who she is. She sent the tape, and it was really one of those things where she'd like self-taped and sent it because she wanted it that badly. And we watched the tape, and we were like, oh yeah, okay, obviously. Like, it was really just such a no-brainer at that point. So,
and Max, did Max not know her before that whole experience?
He didn't know her like personally. I don't believe.
Yeah.
I think that we were both just sort of like, I mean, I don't remember, we were, we were writing almost every day. So I think we watched the tape probably either at the same time or like very shortly after. And we were just both like, oh yeah, like, this is great.
Yeah. It was so surreal because when that movie came out, Max had his dad, Henry Winkler, and she had her mom, Leah Thompson, moderate Q&As for that movie, which was like, the older, the above 65 audience in West LA going to the Landmark theaters couldn't have been happier to sit in the same room with the parents.
I know. Well, it's like, I'm so curious how it played with that crowd, because it's kind of a raunchy film. But I ran into Leah Thompson and Zoe also at Sundance that year. But I remember I saw her, I was like, working out of some like coffee shop or donut shop or something, like in between, press junkets or whatever. And Leah Thompson walks in, and I see her ordering, and I was like, I have to say something. So I'm like, Back to the Future is one of my favorite films. I just worked with her daughter. So I was like, and I don't usually do this, but I said, hey, I'm Matt. I worked with your daughter, blah, blah. And she couldn't have been nicer. And we talked for like 20 minutes.
She's the nicest. She's so, they're all, and so is Henry Winkler. I mean, I remember he writes these children's books, and he sent them to my kids, and inscribed them. Just sweet people. Okay, so here's my burning question on Flower. So you have a film short that you wrote and directed called "It's Not You, It's Me" with Jillian Jacobs. Now, there's a moment in that short where she pushes her husband or boyfriend, who gets impaled on some big sharp rod of some kind. The same thing happens in Flower. Was that inspired by the short? Or is that just your sense of humor in general?
Just people getting impaled. Yeah, that's kind of my brand. I don't know. It is funny. I'm like, I've actually never thought about that, but come to think of it, I'm like, I bet that it was around the same time that we were writing that. So maybe it was something that was just in my brain, an idea that was floating around. I don't know which came first, or
that's funny.
But isn't it funny? It's funny because I was talking about, even in the commentary about Blowout, about how De Palma was working on another film, and there's a scene in Blowout that's sort of a direct, you can kind of pinpoint. You're like, oh, it was this point. He must have recycled this from another project that he was working on. And so it's funny. Sometimes it happens, I think, subconsciously. You don't even realize that you're doing it. And you kind of repeat yourself. And
tell me if this is an accurate perception of your work. To me, a lot of the things that I've seen that you've done seem to have they always have a sense of humor to them, but the sense of humor always seems to lean a little bit on the darker side. Whether that's Flower or Ingrid or that short. There's other things that you're kind of like, you directed the pilot of Dollface, you directed on Becoming a God in Central Florida. But with your own stuff, when you're writing and directing, is that accurate? Is that where your head goes, or just was it a coincidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not something I necessarily set out to do. I think that's just my sense of humor. Yeah, it's my taste. Like, I think it is. I think I like sort of looking at the darker aspects of life and trying to find the humor there. I think it's just something that gets me excited when I watch films. Yeah. I love like Jordan Peele, and I think he's great at sort of, again, finding humor in sort of dark moments and themes and stuff. And I think it in a sense, it makes it more palatable to at least to me. I think it's easier to sort of watch something that is kind of heavy if there's a sense of humor to it. And I think, like when I think about like Brian DePalma, I mean, it's somebody who's like has fun with the fact that he's making a film. You know what I mean? You can really feel that, and it's fun to watch because I think you can feel that come through. So I think that's more what I'm striving for, rather than like overly intellectualizing and saying, well, I need to make something dark. I think it's a way of just trying to amuse yourself as you're dealing with, dark themes, whether it's, with Flower, with, sexual abuse, or if it's like, in Ingrid with depression and, social media addiction, mental illness. Like, those are hard topics to talk about, but I think being able to have a sense of humor about it makes it a little bit easier to digest and sort of have those conversations.
Sure. Well, I mean, look at where we're all at today. If you can't have a sense of humor about what we're all going through, I don't know how you get through it, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's self-care in a way.
That's right.
Way of managing the world. Because at least me, like, I'm obsessed. I will, and now this is like, I feel like many of us are being tested right now in terms of like how you jokingly, you emailed me last night and you said, was it okay to talk about how you've played 200 hours of Animal Crossing?
Now listen, let's not minimize the approaching 300 hours of Animal Crossing that you've clocked.
Oof. I mean, but it's funny because it's like, to me, it's fully just self-care, of just a way of just like, how do I just like, the world is so intense, everything's so intense, and how do you cope?
It's nothing that the turnip market can't help dissipate, right?
So true.
That's
I do feel
thing.
like they've been getting a little stingy with me. I'm like, I think I might need to like take a little breather from the game, because I feel like they're not, giving me. I'm just getting the same stuff over and over again. So I'm like, come on, guys, like it's a video game. Let's just.
I'll tell you, like anybody who has no idea. I mean, I think a lot of people have an idea where they know about Animal Crossing on the Nintendo Switch, but the amount I go onto my Nintendo Switch, this is how I know because we're connected on there. But the amount of adults that I know who are friends of mine who have clocked literally 300 to 500 hours on Animal Crossing is absolutely it's insane to me. But you know what it is? I mean, it's building a ship in a bottle. It's doing Legos. It's doing puzzles. Whatever it is to get your mind off of what you spend most of your day doing. So
it's a little mental vacation. Yeah, 100%. I usually play it right before I go to sleep, and I just literally fall asleep with it in my hand. Sometimes I'm like, hilarious. It's just so soothing. It's my Ambien, Yeah, it's like.
All right, so let's talk Blowout. So I want to know, first of all, the first time you saw Brian DePalma's film, when was it? Where were you mentally, physically? Like, and what was that experience seeing this movie for the first time?
Well, I think I talked about it, but I was in my childhood bedroom watching, I had a TV and a VCR, and I would often fall asleep watching TV or, a movie or something.
Right.
And so once a month, I don't know, back then HBO would offer sort of like these free trials. And so,
free weekends.
It was like, or maybe it was even less than that. It might have been like a couple of times a year. But I remember I would like voraciously, like whenever we did that, because my parents were so cheap and they were like, we're not paying for that. So I would just consume like this free, month or week or whatever they'd give you, and just nonstop watch stuff. And that's how I saw some of my favorite movies for the first time. I saw Boogie Nights for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Like on HBO, like late at night. So obviously all the best movies too were on at like after midnight.
Right.
They would play the like really salacious and stuff. So of course, as a teenager, that's the stuff that you want to watch. And Blowout was one of those movies. And I remember it was just one of those perfect things where like, it's so rare too. And back then when you'd be flipping the channels and you'd hit right as the movie was starting, it's
right.
Usually you jump in and the opening scene of Blowout is, I mean, can you imagine truly an opening scene more captivating to like a 13-year-old like boy than the opening of this movie? Like, I mean, it was just literally like, I think finally I was just like, oh yeah, I'm definitely watching this whole movie. But what's interesting is that like I was lured in by this sort of, salacious slasher movie with a bunch of nudity or whatever. But there's this really like intense, like expertly made genre thriller, paranoid thriller attached to it. And that whopper of an ending that's just like, and I think, so it was like, I just went on this like full ride, and this was, my film education. I hadn't even really decided. I think I wanted to be a filmmaker at this point. It was just like a really cool movie that I saw and that had always stuck with me, that I don't even know if I remembered like the title of it. And then I remember in college it coming up as a potential movie that I could do an essay on. And I was just like, oh my God, that's the movie that I saw. I love this movie. I want to write about that. And so I watched it a bunch and wrote about it for this essay. And I looked for it. I couldn't find it, but it's like, it was on an old computer that I probably threw away. But, I would love to read that. It was probably like written on Adderall at like 5 a.m. the night before. But so who knows if it even was cogent, but,
why do you, it didn't do well, right? Like they expected it to do like 60 or 80 million dollars. It did 13 million off of an 18 million budget. From your perspective, I mean, do you have any opinion as to why you think it didn't resonate for folks?
I think it's a good question, because it is always like, I think tragic when like you really, as a filmmaker, I would imagine, where you feel like you've made your masterpiece, right? Like one of your best films, and it just doesn't work for whatever reason. And what kind of a mental spiral that sends you in, you know what I mean? And because I think it wasn't like it even got like the critics did understand it. Like the critics raved about it. They loved this movie. And he couldn't have been hotter as a director. I think John Travolta couldn't have been hotter as an actor. So it was like this movie had everything that it needed to work, and it just didn't. And the only thing I can think of is it's a crazy ending. You know what I mean? It's not the sort of expected ending. And I think that maybe it was just too future for audiences at the time. They just were not ready for it. But
it still felt like 70s filmmaking in the early 80s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it had that spirit of those those guys like who were, like the Scorsese's and stuff. Yeah, it was very much like very film literate, like very clearly like referencing the references. You could feel it, you could feel the Hitchcock for sure. You could feel, I mean, I was just, every time I watch it, I'm just marveling at like the actual just craftsmanship of it.
Yeah. I haven't seen, I'm looking forward to sitting back down and watching it with your commentary, because it's
over the whole thing.
It's what's that?
And hearing me
talk
over the whole.
It's been a long time since I've watched it. So I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say about it. And I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe haven't even seen it. So the hope is they can, the movie's available everywhere to download, rent. I don't know if it's streamable for free on some of the platforms.
It's on Amazon Prime, actually. My fiance and I, we watched it in separate rooms, and we watched it at the same time because I didn't have a headphone splitter, so she couldn't. Yeah.
Great.
But she loved it. She was like shook. She came out and she was like, that was a crazy movie. I can't believe I watched that.
Well, there you have it. So it's streamable on Prime. You can buy it on iTunes. You can rent it. So I appreciate, Matt, you taking the time to do this. I can't wait to get into your head a little bit as we also get into DePalma's head and experience Blowout. So thanks for doing this.
No, thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Of course.
Enjoying it.
Okay. Thanks again, Matt.
All right, so Brian DePalma's Blowout. The first time I saw this movie, I want to say it was when I was in either middle school or maybe a freshman in high school. And it was really late at night on maybe HBO or Cinemax or one of those premium channels that we would get once a month because my parents weren't subscribers, and I had a TV in my room, so occasionally I would stay up really late watching the cool movies that would play late at night. So I'd check and see if it had, nudity or violence or anything in it. And this one, I think, has all of it, as we're about to see here. But as, a teenager watching this movie, I mean, you can't get, I think, a better intro than this. I mean, just gets right into it. How crazy is this? I think one of the things I love about De Palma is his just outright open sleaziness, kind of. As a filmmaker, he just really just doesn't shy away from sex and violence in a way that I think is kind of fun. And it does seem like movies have gotten a little more chaste in some ways since the 80s, I guess. Anyway, I think one of the reasons why this movie stuck with me too is because I'm from Philly, and Brian De Palma is also from Philly. Or I don't know if he was born in Philly, but he definitely grew up there. And I just, as somebody who was into film as a kid, I think just anything that was shot in Philly was just really exciting to me, because I didn't think of the town where I grew up as a place where movies got made, except for like M. Night Shyamalan. Which, fun fact, I was actually my brother and I were background actors in a scene from Unbreakable, M. Night Shyamalan film, and our scene was cut, unfortunately. It's on the DVD, the special edition DVD, but you still can't see us. Or we were just such deep background that I think it was just, we couldn't see us. I mean, I'm actually like, as I know I said that thing earlier about this, but I'm like, this opening is really, there's so much sex. I think that's kind of the point, though. I think this is clearly this homage to sort of slasher films. Oh, what a cool shot. Oh my God, that guy's so scary. Incredible payoff. What an opening. I mean, can we just for a second just appreciate that opening to a film? Like, the amount of technical expertise that it required to pull that off, and for that amazing payoff. It's kind of crazy to think that this movie was a bomb when it opened. I think the movie cost $18 million and it made only 13, which I think $18 million at the time was probably a huge budget. I mean, De Palma was coming off of Carrie and Dressed to Kill, so I feel like he was a really hot director. John Travolta was had done Saturday Night Fever, and he was huge. So this was like a big budget movie, and it really got great reviews. Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert both loved it. One of the rare occasions that I agreed with Pauline Kael. I feel like even though I love her reading her writing, I often disagree with her takes. And I do know that De Palma, though, I think was one of her favorite directors. She would jock him a lot. This is also one of my favorite genres of movies, which the paranoid thriller. I actually have a T-shirt made by this art collective named Boot Boys, but they did a T-shirt that has Antonioni's Blowout, Blowout, and the Coppola's The Conversation, and has a graphic with all three of those movies sort of mashed up. But they're kind of it's an amazing trilogy of three different filmmakers kind of coming at the same story in three different ways, and all three are stone cold classics in my opinion. But for some reason this one is just kind of more fun to me. And what a great title sequence, too. I want to look up who did that. I want to say it was Saul Bass. This is going to piss me off if I don't look it up, sorry. Fun fact, the titles for Blowout were designed by Richard Greenberg, who was actually, he passed away, sadly, a few years ago, my friend's dad. My friend Luke Silver Greenberg, he has a trailer and poster company, and his dad designed some of the most epic title sequences. I think he did Superman. I want to say Alien. Maybe. God, I should just look. The list of. Let's see. Yeah, Alien, Superman. A lot of Brian DePalma did Untouchables. Just so many classics. Mission Impossible, another great Brian De Palma movie. I always forget that he did that one. It's crazy. I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you've seen this movie before. Hopefully you're not watching it for the first time with me talking over the whole thing. But you're getting so much story here. Like, it's honestly shocking how much story you're getting. And it's all on theme, and it's all like, every time I watch it, I'm truly just shocked at how good it is. So jealous. It's really interesting to watch this right now too, because I mean, we're recording this just, I don't know when you're listening to this, but it is August 2020. And just at the time when this was made, this is still like the country was still reeling from Watergate, and these paranoid thrillers were, that were kind of in vogue at the time. I think were really a reaction to just the general distrust of the government and the people in power and politicians, and even this sequence. I think DePalma tried to distance himself from the whole Chappaquiddick scandal here, but I mean the visual is too, it's too similar to ignore that and think that there wasn't maybe some even subconscious allusion to that incident. If you don't know what the Chappaquiddick scandal was, you should look it up. It's really tragic. I think they made a movie about that too. So this sequence, I remember I also wrote a paper on this movie when I was at USC for one of my film classes. This sequence I wrote about specifically because of how important the sound design is. And just how this shot of the frog is incredible, that split diopter. But it's just so immersive and just so, like, he's really showing off as a director here. But just the visual and, the storytelling with sound and images is just... I mean, you think about like a sequence like this with so many shots, also just shooting at night. I'm just thinking in my head, I'm like, what did the production schedule look like for this sequence? Like, how many days did they spend shooting this? How many lenses did they use shooting this? Incredible 70s music cue. Definitely the first time I watched this, I didn't notice the man standing under the bridge, but the second time you watch it, it's kind of hard to miss. So I wonder, being from Philly, if this was the Schuylkill River that they're in right now. This says it is the Henry Avenue Bridge. This is amazing. Wow, this website has everything. Oh, actually, well, I have some conflicting information. One website says it was the Henry Avenue Bridge, and another website says it was the Wissahickon Bridge over the Wissahickon Creek. But the Schuylkill River is in the movie, so keep an eye out for that one. All you river fans out there. by the way, my fiance is watching this movie for the first time in another part of the house because I didn't have a headphone splitter so she could watch it with me. But she is apparently just finished the opening sequence and texted me, Matt, what the fuck is this movie? And then she said, oh, it's a movie within a movie. This is just a great example, too, of like depth in the depth of field in a frame, just how many layers of action are happening in this shot. I feel like it's become kind of a lost art a little bit, where I remember actually when I watched Roma, the Cuarón film, I was kind of blown away by the amount of stuff he had going on in his frames. Just you could see it felt like blocks, and there were just so many background actors, and I was just blown away by the production value of that. And doing shots like this, it requires so much preparation and rehearsal, and it's really hard to pull off. And so when you see it done this well, that just makes me jealous, I guess. This is Nancy Allen, who I don't know if, I know everybody knows who John Travolta is, or most people, but Nancy Allen was kind of De Palma's muse, and I think that they had a relationship at some point, and I don't know. Yeah, so they were married for 4 years, which is where they made all their movies, pretty much. Dressed to Kill, Blowout. And Home Movies, forgot about that one. This is also, if you listen to the soundtrack, this is, I think, referred to as the love theme. This becomes important as the film goes on, but you'll hear this piano song in scenes with them a lot. I don't know what to read into this but having just recently watched Dressed to Kill, I'm realizing that prostitutes also play a large role in De Palma's films. Because I believe Nancy Allen also plays a prostitute in Dressed to Kill. I don't know. Doesn't seem great, but to say, hey, Nancy, I think you'd be great for this role of the prostitute twice. Starting to get typecast as a prostitute. Might start to wonder where you went wrong in your career, but they're both great films. So, if you had to be a prostitute in 2 movies, it would be great to be in those 2. That was I know I was talking over it, but great. I think, the film does such a great job of putting you in John Travolta's perspective. And that was a great example of that. But if you watch, I mean, obviously the bridge sequence was another one. But I think it's really important in a film like this where you don't know who to trust, and you're kind of, you know, it's really important to ground the audience in the character's perspective, because there's no, you know, if you're too objective, then it starts to make him seem crazy. And I think you want to feel like, am I crazy? You know, you're just as crazy as he is. Nothing suspicious about that. I'm really grateful that he didn't say that the press would have a field day, because it's one of my least favorite cliches of writing. The press would have a field day with this, because when was the last time you ever referred to a field day, unless it was referring to the press having one? You know, it's lost all meaning. I love also that the innocence of the time, when the idea of being so shocking that a politician was cheating on his wife, that this would be news. So I want to say that's Broad Street. No. That was City Hall in the background for sure. This is also great rear projection. It's probably important to note that, if it isn't evident already, that DePalma was a huge, huge Hitchcock fan. And what's funny about that, I think, watching that now, is that, like, everyone's like, well, yeah, Hitchcock, you know, obviously, he's a genius. But it's really because of directors. I mean, obviously his movies were wildly popular, but it was, you know, part of the reason I think why we're still talking about Hitchcock is because of directors like DePalma, who, you know, were clearly so influenced by him. I think I remember reading somewhere that Vertigo was one of the films that De Palma saw that made him want to become a filmmaker. And so it's interesting that I think, you know, film being still such a young art form, but at the time that, you know, De Palma was coming up in the 60s as a filmmaker, you know, there was no, like, you know, he was part of the sort of the new generation of young filmmakers who'd grown up watching films. I should say talkies, you know, because there was sort of the classic period with, you know, the John Fords of the world, and, you know, who sort of were there at really the beginning of, you know, I mean, not the very beginning, but that's sort of like the classic period of, like, you know, movies from the 40s. But then there were this sort of young guys like Scorsese and De Palma, who were all friends, but and, you know, obviously the French New Wave filmmakers, but who were who were sort of these cinephiles who'd grown up watching these movies and then were, in a sense, taking the classics and reinventing them in a lot of ways and updating them for a new time. So I think the whole point of that tangent was just to sort of how much we take for granted of just the film history and, these guys, I mean, DePalma, Bogdanovich, these guys were all sort of that time where they were all people who were studying films and had grown up studying them and then said to themselves, well, I can do that. I love this sequence too because not only is he using the incredible sequence that he did earlier in the film, but he's recreating it using only sound. And no dialogue. You understand exactly what's happening in his head. You're right there with him. Is it a tire blowing up or is it a gunshot? Whoa, this shot is crazy. How did he even do that? I want to say it was rear projection, maybe? It was definitely some kind of compositing happening there. I think, like, he just made Philly look so cool. Like, I feel really, you see New York portrayed so much in film and LA, for that matter. And, random places like that have good tax breaks, like New Orleans or Atlanta. But I love that he showed Philly some love here. And it plays such a crucial, he didn't just shoot Philly as just a random city. It really is, like, important that it's Philly. Wow. Sorry for all the silence, but I'm literally this is probably the 7th or 8th time I've seen this movie, and I'm still just, my jaw is just open as I'm like, every shot is perfection. Love that wallpaper too, by the way. The wallpaper, if you're watching this for the first time, you won't understand the significance of it, but it will come into play later. Red, white, and blue. I love how meta this movie is too. I mean, it's almost like Scream or something, where it's taking, the blow up or the conversation, but it's making it a movie in that style, but also about movies. It makes a lot of sense that this is also one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite movies. I've heard him talk about it a lot, which makes sense because you watch something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is his love letter to movies, and it just makes a lot of sense that they're, two film buffs who became film directors. And you can just feel the love of filmmaking in everything that they do. I know this is a small thing too, but this is the sound design. I mean, you can hear, it was such a small thing, but at the beginning of the scene, you dolly in, you see some guys playing soccer in the background, or I don't know what they were playing, but you can hear them through this whole thing, and I just have to think it's just the craftsmanship and the level of thought that went into every frame of this. But he's also a sound guy, so the sound design would be so important. It's one of those things that when it's good, even when you just don't think about it. But having done a sound mix for a film, it is really hard and tedious and very subjective. Sometimes I feel like I could hear things that other people couldn't hear, things that were bothering me, and so it just ends up taking so long. Manny Karp, incredible name. I believe we're about to find out. I think it's Dennis Franz. Oh yeah, there he is. This role would be played by Jake Johnson if this movie were made now. Incredible. Steals every scene that he's in this movie. Also in Dressed to Kill. I feel like they just kicked Michael Caine out of the crew, and then they just went and made this movie right after Dressed to Kill. It's almost the entire same cast. Just look at these posters too. I bet these are all... Oh, no, Food of the Gods, that's a real movie. I was like, I wonder if these are fake movies. Oh, this is another one of my favorite sequences coming up. It's also incredible that DePalma wrote this film. I mean, it's hard enough directing a great film, but to also write one and then direct it yourself. Oh, there's a little line, if you could see, line drawn on the paper for him to cut. I love how analog this is too. I mean, obviously because it was 1981, but I feel like at USC we were one of the last classes to actually shoot on film, cut on film. It was called 310, but it was like sort of the second film class you take at USC. You shoot on these ancient cameras that look like what they were shooting on when they were, storming the beaches at Normandy. I mean, they're so old. They look kind of like that. And we were shooting, black and white 16, and then cutting together these films on flatbeds. And every time you made an edit, you actually literally cut the film, and then you have to put a piece of tape on it to splice together the two pieces of film that you want to join together to make the cut. And obviously then later you make a print and it's a little, it's ideally seamless, but you really have to think about that cut that you're making. And it's one of those things that's like, I think shooting digitally, editing digitally, it's just a lost art of just how sure of yourself you had to be, but that you're like, a lot of times too, back then I don't even think you would have a monitor. So you're just shooting and just hoping that you got it. You don't know until you get the film developed and watch the dailies the next morning, that you're like, oh, whew, we got it. Speaking of getting your film developed, another lost art. I'm trying to think where this is in the city, and I really don't know. It looks like it's near 30th Street Station. And there you have it. Great coat. 30th Street Station was also featured in a great movie called Witness, if you haven't seen that film, with Harrison Ford. Great film. And Danny Glover. And a young Lucas Haas. 30th Street Station does not look like this anymore. Reading Terminal Market, oh wow. Reading Terminal Market's kind of like just like a bunch of like food stations. I don't know why would you call that? I guess a market. Ugh. Sadly, I can't go and delete some of these dumber comments of mine, so just ignore them, please. What a great, I don't know if anyone caught that painting on the wall. Just DePalma couldn't help slipping another topless woman into this film, even as a painting. I will say, as an addendum to my previous prostitute comment, it's a testament to how good of an actress Nancy Allen is, that her characters are very different. The character in Dressed to Kill feels much more savvy and worldly, and just is way more of a hustler than the Nancy Allen prostitute in this film, who is a lot more wide-eyed and innocent, and it's really interesting that you could play a similar role so differently. Great for her resume. here's a great sequence coming up. I usually hate these scenes in movies where the character says, well, here's my backstory and all the stuff that happened before the movie started and that you don't care about. But this one really makes perfect sense why they kept it in the film and included it. So this sequence, just to give it some context as to maybe where he dreamed this up, DePalma was at one point attached to Prince of the City, which Sidney Lumet ended up directing, but is a movie about an undercover cop who is trying to expose police corruption within the NYPD. And it's a really grim, dark, and intense, but really interesting film. True story, or inspired by a true story, based on a book. But I can't help but think that, I don't know the circumstances of him, whether he left that movie or whether he was fired off that movie, but that De Palma was like, I didn't just waste all that time working on Prince of the City to not include an undercover scene of a guy trying to bust some guys with a wire. Because it's a cool... Ooh, this shot's grainy. Is this shot grainy for you guys too? It's interesting, too, that this is an aside, but Vilmos Zsigmond, he shot this film. He was notorious for using a technique called flashing, which is where you psychotically expose the film to a little bit of light before you shoot it with whatever you're going to shoot it with. So it's a technique they used on... McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and I'm blanking on other Vilmos Zsigmond films, but he used it on almost all of his movies. And he didn't use it on this one, or maybe not as much. And I think it was a decision that him and De Palma made together that just it didn't make sense for this film. They wanted, and what it does is it washes out the blacks a little bit. It makes your blacks a little milkier. And it gives everything kind of a vintagey, look that, now we kind of take for granted. I think a lot of stuff that you'd see nowadays, especially like when the Alexa first came out, or the Arri Alexa was just a really popular digital camera. Not as much anymore. They've sort of evolved beyond that. But, with digital, the blacks just were never, especially in the early days, never as rich as with film. It's always a little bit had a milkier, washed out look, and it's a stylistic choice. It's a lot of people like that, but I do feel like it became kind of overused because of that's just how digital was. Oh my god, pretty amazing that you could kill someone with just a lav mic like that. It seems a little far-fetched. I mean, what an incredible character motivation. Can we just pause for a second and just appreciate that? He literally got this guy killed because he was sweating and the mic was burning him. And you know he's not going to just sit there and let it happen again. He knows that there's some dirty business involved with the governor who died or whatever. Wow, he's just doesn't waste any time. They're going to run away together. They've known each other for approximately 48 hours. And he's already revealed his traumatic backstory to her, so I guess it's bonded them. He doesn't really know anything about her, though. I want to keep looking up all these locations, but I feel like nobody who's listening to this cares. But this is an underground mall that connects to 30th Street Station. The Gallery. That's right. I wanted to call it the Galleria, but that is in Glendale, California. So I believe this is Reading Terminal Market, or at least what it used to look like. Just great locations. I mean, they really... Oh, you know what? This might be the Italian market. I don't know. Incredible. Septibus. Wow, he really just killed that girl in pretty much the middle of the street. Oh. I have to say, I always think that the music choices in DePalma films are a little interesting. It's probably my least favorite part of his films. And I think the part of his films that have probably aged the worst. This, of course, is John Lithgow, who you may remember from Third Rock from the Sun. Slightly different vibe here. But he was also in another De Palma film that came out years later. And I'm really just, my brain is not working tonight, so I have to look it up. But I don't want to get it wrong. Raising Cain, 1992. Great visual storytelling here. A little bit of a logic gap I'm noticing here that I've never noticed before, but I'm like, why did he grab the ice pick if he was going to strangle her? So he got the idea to stab the Liberty Bell into her. But he didn't know about the Liberty Bell until that moment. So why did he grab the ice pick? Brian, care to answer? The movie's just so good, though, that you don't care. I mean, this character, he's even got, like, baked beans spilled all over himself. I mean, it's really... You just know this guy is up to no good. That's another thing that I miss, is that nowadays every time you see a TV or a screen of something, whether it's a phone or a TV or computer, in movies, it's usually a blank screen or a green screen that they do a replacement. And they look so good now. We did a couple on my movie. And you really can't tell the difference for the most part. But there is just something that is cool about just panning past TV that's clearly on. You know, it's casting light off. And I'm just going to say this, red, white, and blue. You're seeing it. There's the red wall. So there's Nancy Allen. She's wearing a blue coat, or it looks blue to me. I think it's blue. So a white lampshade and a red wall. Okay, now here's a music cue that I can get behind. That guitar solo. Ooh. And it's gone. Just needed a little something to get us out of that last scene. Just a little funky riff. I'm gonna say it again. John Travolta's wearing a red shirt, and there's a blue wall behind him, and there's a white light. I mean, like, the levels here. This is they're talking about the Liberty Bell thing, America. It's like, this is about a politician who has been possibly murdered, assassinated. This is a reaction to Watergate. Again, look at the marker. Red, blue, a little white pencil there. I mean, you don't even think about it the first time you're watching it, but I just wonder, sometimes not to take anything away from the production designer, because maybe the production designer, that was just a little fun thing that they did, that they said, let's see if we can sneak in red, white, and blue whenever we can. Or if that was DePalma. I mean, I would imagine, because DePalma seems like someone who's such a control freak, that that came from on high. But I mean, John Travolta is making a movie within the movie. He's made a movie out of cutouts that he cut out of a magazine of Dennis Franz's photos, and he's married it with his sound, and he's made a little movie. It's like, this is also, by the way, I said Watergate, but this is coming off of, it's only 18 years after the JFK's assassination. So it's like, the Zapruder film nod here is pretty. I mean, we've got Chappaquiddick, we've got Zapruder, we've got a little bit of Watergate conspiracy. Ben Franklin also was a famous Philadelphian. You see him everywhere. There's even a guy that dresses up like Ben Franklin that wanders around the colonial area. It looks just like him too. Oh, look at that, like, police Bronco. That is pretty cool. I don't want to turn this into just a whole red, white, and blue thing, but, like, just look at all the red, white, and blue combos that's happening here. I mean, there's the cop car through the window, there's the calendar, there's his jacket, there's the chair, there's his tie. Anyway, I won't mention the red, white, and blue thing again, because I know you're tired of it, but... If you're loving this film, by the way, I'm watching the Criterion edition of it, and it's fantastic, and the supplements are great, and there's people way smarter than me that talk about it. So if you can't get enough of watching Blowout with people talking over the film, do yourself a favor and get that Blu-ray. I hope it's still in print. It's really good. John Travolta is really good in this movie. Like, I really buy him as this guy. Another film that I haven't talked about that's another one of my favorites in this genre, if this is a genre that you're interested in, is Parallax View with Warren Beatty, which I believe predates this film. I want to say it was 1978. Let me look it up. But what a great film. And 74, 78, what the hell am I talking about? 74, Alan Pakula, shot by Gordon Willis, another great cinematographer. And there's, it's a similar thing, assassination, guy who's trying to figure out what's really going on. Incredible filmmaking, and there's a sequence in it, I want to say it's like 8-minute long montage. Sounds boring. It's one of the coolest visual sequences I've ever seen in anything, and audio. I mean, it's just there's a great music track that plays over it, and all these images cut together. It must have taken them, when you think about the fact that they were doing it all by hand, it must have taken them months. But really great film. I just watched that not that long ago, and really, I again watched it in college and then loved it, but then revisited it. And another example of a lot of these movies starred, hunky lead male actor who was very, heartthrob at the time. Oh. So, as much as I love this film, as a writer, I don't love this scene. I don't love that you're stepping outside of Travolta's perspective here. I just feel like we don't need it. I feel like you could have just cut this. We've already seen, I think I like getting the little glimpses of Lithgow, doing his thing and murdering and changing the tire and stuff. This feels like a little bit of a concession. I want to say, was like a studio note that's like, the audience isn't going to know what's going on. So can we have a scene where the bad guy just says what he's doing to one of the other bad guys that we've never met before and explains their whole plot? And it's like, ugh, why do we need this? I think what's interesting about this is that there's clearly they clearly did ADR for a scene about doing ADR. I mean, the meta-ness of that is just, my brain hurts thinking about it. ADR, for those who don't know, is short for additional dialogue recording. That's something that you do in post-production. Let's say, an actor messed up a line, or there was a car going by on an important line, and so you're like, we'll get it, we'll do ADR. 90% of the time it sounds really bad, and I can usually notice it in a movie, and it bothers me, but most people don't notice it. And that's not a brag, it's just a pet peeve of mine. I think it's usually better to do what's called a wild line, which is when you're on set and you just say, you're like, that was a great take, but we missed that line, and you just have the actor do it right there while you're on set. It sounds so much better. You just cut it right in. Because they're already in character, and the sound's the same because you're in the same set, and sometimes you can't do it, though. You don't realize till later or whatever. This is also a famous shot. And what I'll say about why this shot, this is why I'm like, he's such like a film geek. He's a film geek himself, but he's a director for film geeks, because doing a 360 pan shot like this is so hard. Like, honestly, just the amount of preparation it takes to have no equipment anywhere in the shot. So this, maybe Vilmos had something rigged up in the ceiling. I'm guessing he probably must have, because how else would they be lighting this? But, he's obviously got something outside that window there, because you can see it on the door. He's got something outside the door. But, usually top lighting looks really bad. And so it's really hard to light people and make them look good with top lighting. So I'm just like, how did they do it? And with film, too, you got to use a lot of light to expose film and make it look good. It's not like digital where, you can shoot an 800 ISO and, this shot. I mean, it makes me think that they must have been on this must be on a set, obviously, because to get this shot, it would be impossible in an actual location. So that makes more sense that they were able to control the lighting to a certain degree. Also, Hitchcock, famously, he hated shooting on location because he didn't give him the level of control that he wanted, and that's evidence right there of why, having that degree of control, and you're on a studio and you can, not have a ceiling on your set, you can do cool shots like that you can't do when you're shooting in a real office or whatever, This obviously is a real office. And then, every time they go in that other room, it just cut to what they shot in the studio. I don't know is this like people listening to this? I really hope I'm like, if it's really hardcore, like film people, they're going to be like, this idiot, why is he explaining stuff to us? We already know all this. We know what ADR is. Shut up. Well, maybe somebody doesn't know what ADR is, and now they do. You're welcome. I don't trust this guy as far as I can throw him. This guy is a narc if I ever saw one. He probably works for the CIA. Okay, he said, I must have missed that line. So he made a mistake here. He hid the tape, which was smart. But now it's out in the wild. Here's my favorite sound cue again, or music cue. It's like hold music. It's like when you call like the power company and they put you on hold. This is the song that plays. That looks, I don't know, but that looks like South Street to me. Which is also where I bought my first bong in high school. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening to this podcast. This is a really specific thing, but this is such an this is, there's no way this is a set, because this is the most accurate Philly apartment that I've ever seen. Like, it's the weirdest layout. Like, the kitchen is like weirdly shallow, and I'm just like, there's a fireplace where you'd be like so close to it. Why would anyone want a fire like that? Philly apartments are, I just remember I never actually officially lived in Philly, but I was always slightly outside of Philly. But in college, I would visit my friends in their apartments, and they all look like this. Who's that guy in the cool glasses that's on her wall? Imagine not being able to type. Well, that's a real tear. Nancy Allen is a good actress. If you want, I mean it, if you want proof of how good of an actress she is. Watch this movie and watch Dressed to Kill. It's the same part, pretty much, but wildly different approaches to a prostitute character solving a mystery. Very impressive. Let's see if my fiance's texted me anything else. No, nothing. She must be so riveted by the film. I don't have anything to offer this scene, so I'm just going to use this opportunity to talk about, if you want to learn more about filmmaking or Brian DePalma, there's a book called The Devil's Candy that is about the making of Bonfire of the Vanities, which was... it was a book written by Tom Wolfe. It was a huge, huge book. And Brian DePalma was hired to direct the film, which starred Tom Hanks, Bruce Willis, and Melanie Griffiths. And it was a disaster. The film is a disaster. And, just an unmitigated disaster. From the first second it starts, you're like, you just know you're not in good hands in this film. And again, that's not every director has some, turkey in their on their IMDb page. But so no knock against De Palma. He's made many great films. But the book is fascinating because it really chronicles from the beginning, from just day one, I think even just before pre-production, the whole process of the making of the film. And it is just truly one of the most entertaining. If you're at all interested in Hollywood or filmmaking or whatever, it is just like, I would put it up there with like Sidney Lumet's Making Movies and, William Goldman's book and any great filmmaking book, because it just shows you how easily things can go off the rails. And it's never just one thing. It's usually like a slow motion car crash like this was. That it just kind of makes you appreciate just how any film is ever good is like a miracle. Because it just really gives you a glimpse into behind the scenes of a making of something, and just all the egos and personalities and challenges that you face making something. And it's interesting because, I can only speak from my own experience, but just making Ingrid Goes West, it was probably one of the roughest film shoots. A lot of people that have worked on that film, I don't take this as a compliment, but they said that was a really hard shoot. That was probably one of the hardest shoots. And that was not all my fault. We had a lot of challenges that we had to face that were out of our control. But it really doesn't have any bearing, the making of a film. There are movies that were just, the making of the film was a disaster, and the movie's great. And there's movies that it was so easy to make and nobody cared when the movie came out. So, it really does not have, it doesn't, I don't know. Sometimes I would imagine it could make an impact, but it doesn't always. I don't know why I can't stop picturing Jake Johnson as in this role. I'm trying to think who would play Nancy Allen, but she's so good, I can't think of who. Just to circle back to Devil's Candy for 1 second, just to give you a little taste, because I just remembered something, a detail from that book, but just the kind of thing that, if you like what I'm about to say, then you should definitely read this book. But there's a whole running thing throughout the whole book of Bruce Willis's bald spot that it just keeps like getting bigger over the course of the shoot, because I think it was a really long shoot. It just dragged on and on and on, and they were having to do, he had a guy on set that was like just there to like make sure they were lighting it properly and to spray stuff on it to hide it. And there's a whole sequence where De Palma wanted to do this kind of riff on Hitchcock's Foreign Correspondent, where you're high up outside of a courthouse or something, and there's all these people with umbrellas, and Bruce Willis is there. This is my recollection of it, so this could be completely false, but this is what I remember, is that it was like they got the shot set up, it was everything, they had all the umbrellas, and it was just boom, Bruce Willis's bald spot just right in dead center of frame, super shiny from the lights. And they were like, oh god, what do we do? Just as an example of the type of stuff that you have to deal with on a film set. For some reason, I can always tell when you're on a set by the way the doors close. Doors on a set, they just don't have the same weight to them. They feel like they're made out of cardboard or something. That's the Bell Atlantic symbol. That doesn't exist anymore. I think they got bought out by AT&T. Ooh, another great film in this genre that shot just reminded me of is 3 Days of the Condor. I haven't seen that one in a while, but that's Faye Dunaway and Robert Redford, another hunky male actor on the run from shadowy government people, I don't know, conspirators. Ooh, Wiretap. I can't even imagine, how did he write that? It was like, we pan away from the window to the phone line as we float down into the basement to reveal a tape recorder wiretap. Great visual storytelling. Split screen's another DePalma signature. He uses it a lot. And the split diopter. And also, yeah, I just saw Dressed to Kill. He uses it in Dressed to Kill a lot, and a lot of information revealed via TVs. Damn, how long was that body laying there? I feel like that was like 5 days ago in the movie that she was killed. But maybe it was just the day before. Oof, Jesus, Brian. What the hell? Groin? Sick. Bruce. This is just a small thing about Philly, but even though Bruce Springsteen is famously from Jersey, Philadelphians have adopted him as one of their own. What I'm saying is it's very accurate that a prostitute living in Philly would have Bruce Springsteen I also realized I've been saying prostitute this entire podcast, and I should be saying sex worker, and that is, I apologize if there are any sex workers listening to this podcast. Just another fun fact about Brian DePalma, since, I'm guessing that's why you're listening to this. He is famously one of the first people to work with Robert De Niro as a young actor. They shot a film together in, I believe it was 1963, that remained unreleased for like 6 years, and I think it finally came out in 1969 or 1970. And De Niro still didn't blow up. I think they made 3 movies together, which are available on DVD, but De Niro still didn't blow up until a few years even after the delayed movie came out. So if there are any, struggling actors listening to this, don't give up, because you never know. You could make a movie that gets shelved for 6 years, then comes out, and then you still don't even get famous until like 4 years after that. And then you go on to become Robert De Niro. So, just something to think about. It's so interesting that, to me, that De Palma went on to do Scarface. I don't know. I'm like trying to see if he did it right after this or... Yeah, he did Scarface right after this. And it's so interesting because I would say this film is so much more sophisticated in a lot of ways, but it was a bomb for him. And I imagine that he wanted a hit. So I wonder if that had any bearing, if the failure of this film had any bearing on him deciding to make Scarface, which is probably the film he's most famous for better or for worse. I mean, I think Scarface is very entertaining, but it's far from my favorite Brian De Palma film. I would say this film, Carrie... I'll go to bat for the first Mission Impossible, too. I love the first Mission Impossible. I know there's some other great De Palma films. The Untouchables he did. Oh, my God. So many classics. This hallway plays a big role in the film Witness, which I was talking about before, these bathrooms, the train station. It seems kind of quaint, this idea of a train station, but I'm like, this is like, I spent so much time in this train station when I was growing up, because growing up outside the city, it was the only way, I didn't have a car, but my parents would let me take the train down to the city, which, again, to go buy bongs and whatnot, as if you heard my previous comment. But the train was such a big thing. I was just, going to the train station, waiting, taking the train in the city. It's just, now that I live in LA, I'm like, the concept of taking all these trains everywhere. And again, we're not talking the subway, we're talking trains, above ground, regional rail. It seems so quaint. I love that she's brushing her teeth in the stall. Seems a little bit of a logic gap. Like, where's she getting the water from? The toilet? Great shot. Incredible. So creepy. There she is, 33rd station. How did they manage to shoot? They made a movie in Philly, but then they used they really just shot every part of the city. They used every part of that buffalo. for those who are paying attention, we're recreating a similar scenario to his traumatic backstory. So the classic, I mean, this is just screenwriting 101, is, you put your character in the same situation and hoping for a different outcome. I mean, what a shot. Just the storytelling is... Oh, I love that. The red school kids. Again, the depth in the frame. I'm like, I don't know that there's any shot, except maybe there's a couple, like in the Dennis Franz scene when they're in those apartments, and they're honestly my least favorite scenes because they're just two people in an apartment. There's no depth, but like here, like how far you can see out that window. And now, the sound guy must use the power of hearing to find the missing sex worker who he is in love with. So, and to refer back to my earlier comment about not liking that one, again, very minor quibbles here, but that one scene where John Lithgow was talking to the shady, evil man who I don't think we ever see again or had seen before. It's important that we see him murder people because otherwise this whole sequence wouldn't work. So we need to step away from John Travolta's perspective a few times in order to build the tension that we're feeling here. So but I still don't think we needed that scene with that other guy. Maybe one day if I'm bored, like I'll do what like Steven Soderbergh does and like re-edit movies and see, just for my own enjoyment, and see if we can cut that scene and the movie still works. And maybe I'll swap out that funky little guitar hold music that really bugs me. I also want to bring back characters and people in general being named Sally, because I feel like that's a name that only existed in the 70s and 80s, and maybe only in movies, because I don't know if I've ever met a Sally in real life, but it's such a good character name, Sally. Another incredible quote from me. It's funny now that, like, I wonder if that was a composite or if that was split diopter. I couldn't tell because the shot was so quick, but Oof, this is painful. They got on the train, so now he's got to... Ugh. Cool car. Is that a Jeep Renegade? I feel like parades are also a staple of the thriller genre. Oh, there's a C-3PO character. So those are the mummers. I don't know if anyone who knows anything about Philly knows who the mummers are. And I kind of know who they are, but I don't really even as someone who grew up in Philly, I knew about the mummers parade, but I don't really understand what they are, and I don't really care to know what they are. So if you want more information on the mummers, Wikipedia is a great resource, but if you were wondering what those weirdly dressed people were, now you know. They're mummers. So that is cool, because that is City Hall, and he is driving a car through it, which is not allowed in real life. And again, speaking of music cues that haven't aged well, I feel like this really funky... This just is so 70s. But, you're having so much fun watching this film, but you don't even care. Oof. I have to say, for a day player, that was a pretty good line reading. I really believed him, that he was really scared for John Travolta. Not a great time to crash your car when your girlfriend is with a serial killer. I remember, too, the first time I saw this, I was just shocked. I was oh my God, this is... The main character just crashed his car, and it was just I've never seen that in a movie before. Usually they just gets there and does something. It's it's so realistic. That is what would happen. You'd be I'm going to drive through the parade, and then you just crash your car, because obviously that's what would happen in real life. Oh no, he's destroying all the evidence. Oh my God. She knows. Oh my God. Ugh. That, I believe, in the background of that shot was where the Declaration of Independence was signed, Independence Hall. But don't hold me to that. If there's any Philly people listening to that, rolling their eyes. It looked like that, though. I went there when I was in elementary school. Oh my God, that boat in the background. This is so, this is very accurate. This is totally where they would be having this parade, this Liberty Day event, which I don't even think is a real thing. I think they made it up for the film, but I definitely don't remember ever going to one. But this is the waterfront, and in the summer they have concerts here. I really hope you're not watching this for the first time, listening to me talk over it. Come on, John. Run. Great. Look at this. I mean, I cannot stress enough how hard this shot was to pull off with all of those background. I mean, just fully there's like, I feel like there's like 500 people there. Spending every cent of that $18 million. Yes. Ugh. He's too late. It happened again. I mean, the audacity of DePalma to fully just kill off one of the main characters in such a tragic fashion. I mean, it's really like, it's so ballsy. And probably why the movie ultimately did not do well. I mean, but it feels real, man. It feels like that's what would happen in real life, you know? You're just a sound guy. You're not like Tom Cruise. You're not Ethan Hunt, you know? He's just a sound guy from Philly. What the hell is he gonna do against the government and a murderer, a trained assassin? She got the credit too. Oof, they don't even know who that guy was. He's definitely a CIA guy. Oh my God. I mean, oh my God, just torturing himself. And I think this was the moment where I was just realized that this movie was genius, because I'm like, holy shit. I mean, to bring it full circle in this way. And to just destroy your main character in this way. I mean, the film's a tragedy. I'm speechless. Well, I mean, I'm not because I'm talking, but I mean, I love it also that they it's Jack, Sally, and then Manny Carp. The name's so good that they couldn't just call him Manny. They had to call him Manny Carp. And Lawrence Henry, by the way. And poor Hooker. Poor Hooker. They couldn't even give her a name, like Jen. At least I said prostitute until I corrected myself. I don't understand. Why would they give all these other characters, Jack Manners? Just really all over the place in terms of who got names and who got just vague descriptions like, oh. Yeah, I have to say credits have gotten way, like, I feel like in the old days they used to just like be like, and this was produced by David O. Selznick and nobody else worked on the film. And then now it's like everyone down to like who, the second assistant of, whatever star gets credit. Janine Oppenwall, she is very famous. I love looking at this because usually 9 times out of 10, if you like a film and you watch the credits, you will see people, or probably a ton of people, or at least 1 or 2 that have worked on another film that you love. Well, sorry I picked such a downer of a film, but I hope that you were as blown away. If you were watching it for the first time, I hope that you were as blown away by it as I was the first time that I saw it. And I hope that you go check out some of Brian De Palma's other films, because the man is still working, but he's just made so many great films and so many different films, different types of films. And one last bit of detail as these credits end, but there was a great documentary about him made by Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow a few years ago that really gives you a great overview of his whole career and just him as a person. They interview him and everything, and it's just a great, really put his work in context if you care to do a deep dive on him. But thank you for joining me for Blowout. I had a great time.
And just like that, this week's episode of The Sidetrack reaches its expected end. I'd like to thank Matt Spicer for taking the time to record his feature-length audio commentary of Blowout. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had the opportunity to watch the film, perhaps for the first time. You can catch Matt Spicer's movie Ingrid Goes West streaming on Hulu, as well as available to rent or buy on all digital platforms, as well as Flower. His shorts are available on YouTube, and so much more. So if you haven't seen those movies, great films, great dude. Thanks again, Matt, for joining us today. As for you, dear listener, if you enjoy The Sidetrack, please subscribe, retweet, let your circle of friends know that in this time of need, when all we want to do is have a few hours of escapist entertainment, there's this to fill the gap. As I said, we'll be back every Thursday with a new Sidetrack feature-length audio commentary. This is Paul Davidson saying thank you, and we'll see you soon.